For this video, we're going to look at transferware made by Homer Laughlin in the 1930s and 1940s. There are 5 lines we're going to focus on, and that's Willow, both in the pink and blue version, Fantasy, which is in rose and blue, Early American Homes, which was made for JCPenney, Americana, which is Currier and Ives prints made for Montgomery Wards, and finally on the Liberty shape, we have Historical America in pink and blue that was made for Woolworths. Now all of these lines are Underglaze Transferware, and Willow was the first. It was done in 1934, and Homer Laughlin had done transferwares before. This was not something new, but this was the first time that they were doing something that was almost completely full surface. If we look at a dinner plate, which comes from the Quaker shape, this would have been done in at least 2 steps. They would have done a print for the center, and then there would have been at least 1 print or multiple prints for the border. So transferware, I'm going to try to explain this the best I can. This design that you see here would have started out as an engraving on copper. And the copper plate would have been used because it was soft enough to etch a very detailed design in it. From those plates you could make your transfer sheets. They were essentially like tissue paper, where you would put the glaze on the copper plate, and then you'd squeegee the excess off. The paper would be put on, then you would roll it so that the impression would be made on the paper. You could then take that tissue paper and put it on a piece of bisque ware, or unglazed ware, sometimes called biscuit, and then you'd have to pounce it on. Once the design was essentially stained onto the bisque ware, you would have to remove the excess paper, that tissue paper. And there are several videos online I'm sure that you can see, or on YouTube. If you type in search words like transferware how-to and or English pottery transferware, I'm sure you can find several that'll go into much more detail. But Willow was the first one that they did, that they needed to go through all this copper engraving. Youngstown Arc Engraving, that did all types of lithographs and prints, were the ones that made the copper plates for them. They had a little bit of trouble with Blue Willow, so they enlisted the help of Taylor Smith & Taylor, who had perfected it. Royal China was another one that perfected underglaze transfers. And you would think, a competitor wouldn't help, but you'd be surprised. A lot of these older potteries, everybody knew each other. Some were in-laws of others because they would marry to keep potteries within the families. So yeah, TS&T was very helpful in getting Homer Laughlin started with this Willow pattern. Shapes were picked up from different lines, usually Quaker. The Wells shape was picked up for the teapot, although they did modify the finial to match the finial on the sugar bowl that was created specifically for Willow, as was the creamer, as it was the sauce boat, which we see here. The hollowware is generally not marked, although it's distinctive enough you should be able to tell Homer Laughlin's from others. There are also these little jugs that were made. This one's in the pink Willow, again not marked, and the blue Willow, not marked. The casserole was picked up from Empress, and an egg cup was picked up, the WW egg cup as it's called. Darlene Nossaman identified that WW as whiteware. I can't confirm that, but I have no reason to doubt her. Darlene Nossaman was very thorough in her research. So there's a little bit of Willow. This line, again, was first made in 1934. It extends all the way into the 1960s. This is one of the few things that comes out of the 30s that is made for such a long period of time. There's some Brittany patterns and Virginia Rose patterns. Of course, Fiesta and Harlequin were made into the 1960s. And then we can throw Blue Willow into that mix. Pink Willow was not made nearly as long. I think that's discontinued sometime in the 1940s. But Willow was meant for the general trade. Anybody could sell it, and usually anybody did. Everybody did. Sears had it. Let's see, Woolworths had it. Montgomery Wards had it. Anybody could sell Blue Willow. Again, pink Willow, you don't see that nearly as often. Let's see, date code. It's going to have a general back stamp, and this one has 1958, plant number 6. Usually only your flatware is going to have a marking. This one is marked 1938. So our next pattern is Fantasy. And we have Rose Fantasy and Blue Fantasy. Now this one, of the ones I'm showing you today, these are the most difficult to find, the Blue and Rose Fantasy. The creamer, the sugar, the teacup, I assume there's a gravy of this. I've never seen one. They come from Willow. The casserole doesn't come from Empress as it does in Blue Willow. It comes from Wells. And I used to have one and I foolishly sold it several years ago. But here's, this picture is going to stand in. So there's your Wells casserole with the Blue Fantasy design. The handles and finial were modified. This was only made for a couple years, like 38, 39. If we look at the back stamps, I'm sure they're all going to say probably 38. That one's 1938. Let's look at the saucer. Oh, you can't see that one. It's 1938 as well. Homer Laughlin took a loss on this line, and they refused to make it after, I believe it's 1939 or 1940. And in one correspondence, they say to Montgomery Wards, who wanted more of it, they basically say, no, we've taken a loss, and we're taking a gamble on this line, which is Americana. They were developing this at the time and spending a lot of time on this, and they're like, look, we're working too hard on that. We're taking a loss on this. No, you can't have any more. And that was the end of Fantasy. And we'll look at a couple advertisements here. And here we see Fantasy with the Wells casserole and the Willow sugar and creamer. And there's the blue and there's the rose version. Here's another Wards advertisement from a catalog, and it shows Blue Fantasy with the linens they were selling as well. They were selling napkins and tablecloths. There's Rose Fantasy. Let's see if we can see what it says there. I don't know if we can focus in on that or not. Yeah. But it says Wards offers beautiful linens. Let's see. Here we look at the bottom part. Okay. And it says an imported pattern of the same quality usually sells for $9 to $12 for a 32-piece set. Wards produced it in America to save you one half. Well, that's the problem. It was undersold, and so Homer Laughlin said, no more. They cost too much money to make, which is a shame. This is a very bold pattern and a very bold treatment. Again, the hollowware is not going to be marked, but your flatware expected to have a 1938 or maybe even a 1939 back stamp. The next line is Early American Homes, which was made for JCPenney, probably the late 1930s, I believe. I don't have an exact date on that. If you go to the website, laurahollowpark.net, and scroll down to the Willow section, you'll see a listing of the JCPenney Early American Home treatments. Each piece had a different pattern. And you see a plate, a platter, a small plate, a nappy, and a dinner plate here. The teacups are impossible to find for this. I know that they exist. I've seen them, but I can't find any. So that's a key shape to find in this, the teacup. Each one of these is going to have a back stamp that describes the subject matter. In this case, it says Early American Homes by Homer Laughlin, Mount Vernon, Washington's home. The nappy says Early American Homes by Homer Laughlin, home of Betsy Ross. And then you have Lincoln's birthplace. The platter in the back is Independence Hall. Not produced for a very long time. It's a pretty limited assortment. And the next one's Americana, which I mentioned before when talking about Fantasy. This was made for Montgomery Wards. And as Homer Laughlin said in their correspondence, we're taking a gamble on this. Well, it kind of paid off because this line was made all the way in the 1950s. I think 1956 might have been the last year it was offered. Just like the Early American Homes, each one has a different treatment, and the subject matter is listed on the back. They come from Currier and Ives prints. Let's look at the nappy first. It says The Road Winner, American subject from Currier and Ives prints, Homer Laughlin. The Underglaze stamp, which you can barely see, is from 1948. Let's Let's look at another one. The sauce boat. Some of these have two, so there's one on one side and one on the other. So we've got, well, let's flip that upside down. There we go. Preparing for market on one side and harvest on the other. They didn't use the Wells teapot for this like they did in Fantasy and Willow. They made a special teapot for Americana. And let's take a look at this one real quick. This is the only line that uses a shaped teapot. Washington family and Washington at Mount Vernon. So there he is with his family, and there he is at Mount Vernon. So this was a very successful line. It was only made in the red, was not made in blue. That's the same for the early American homes as well, only the red or pink. The demi-tasse cup and saucer was created specifically for this line. This is San Francisco, I think. View of San Francisco. American subject, Courier Knives, made in USA by Homer Laughlin. So yeah, Willow and Americana are the more successful of the Underglaze transferwares. The last one we're going to look at is on the Liberty shape. This is the last shape made by Frederick Reed. He died in 1942. This was developed and released in the same year. This is called Historical America. This particular pattern is Betsy Ross showing the flag in 1777. Pictures reproduced from original painting by Joseph Boggs Beale. And you'll see similar back stamps on all of these. The blue treatment is going to be more, it's much harder to find. The treatment number for that is W342. The treatment for the standard red is W449. We'll look at a couple more pieces here. This is the Star Spangled Banner. Let's see, the Sugar Bowl. Barbara Fritchie, 1862. There's Paul Revere. And that's the, I think that's Purchase of Manhattan. Let's see what it says. Purchase of Manhattan Island, 1626. Historical America, Homer Laughlin. So yeah, all of these are going to have the subject matter in the back stamp, which itself is an underglaze transfer. Sugar's not marked. One thing about the teapot and casserole, those were added in 1943. So Frederick Reed did not live to see these two pieces, so he didn't design those. But everything else in Liberty did. This round, well, it's a scallop shape with this quadroon rim or edge embossing. Liberty goes on to become a very popular decalware shape. So even though I don't show any decals here, what we will later on, I'm sure, see some more pieces of Liberty. But its initial purpose was to be this transferware line. So we'll look at a couple advertisements, and that'll be it. We already looked at the fantasy ones. Here's some Blue Willow from, this is Montgomery Wards. This has to be from the 30s because we see Cascade by James River here. We talked about a little bit about James River last time in Modern Farmer. There's also Briar Rose on Century and Gold Stripe on Wells. But the Blue Willow, we see the Empress Casserole, the Willow Sugar and Creamer, and Willow Sauce Boat. And it offers it in different combinations of sets. Let's see, we've got there's one I want to show you. Here it is. Here's Americana, which was made for Montgomery Wards. And we see the cable egg cup, the square plate, which was picked up from Century, the demi-tasse cup and saucer that was specially made, pieces that came from Willow, such as the creamer and sugar and sauce boat. That cable egg cup, we have one here that we can look at real quick. That's the cable egg cup. Lots of shapes from the 30s, 40s, and 50s picked up this cable egg cup, which is a very old Homer Laughlin shape. The treatment is actually listed on the bottom. It says, across the continent. And then on the other side we see Blue Willow. These other two lines, I believe those are American Limoges. And we see Theme Eggshell at the bottom with Heather Lane. That is Blue Ridge. We don't care about Blue Ridge today. So there's more Americana. We see the cream soup cup. The casserole comes from Brittany. It's a lidded nappy. Of course, there's our teapot again. Everything else, looking at it, it looks like it's from Edwin M. Knowles. Yeah, those are all Edwin M. Knowles shapes. And here we come to the end of the run for Blue Willow for Wards, because it shows it on the top portion, but when you get to the bottom portion with our sugar creamer and Empress casserole, it says not available. And here we have 1939, 1940. This is Montgomery Wards as well. We have the jug that we saw, specifically made for Willow. You won't find that in any other line. Again, the Empress casserole and the rest of the Willow pieces. So I think that's going to be it. We're finally at the end of the road for Frederick Reed dinnerwares. Next time we will start with Don Schreckengost in 1948. So again, we've got Blue and Pink Willow, Blue and Rose Fantasy, Early American Homes made for JCPenney, Americana for Montgomery Wards, and finally Reed's last shape, the Liberty shape with Historical American for Woolworths. That's it.